Martha Campbell, one of the co-owners of Barry Campbell with Christine Barry, who is hiding out in the hallways. There she is. Sally Silberberg and Glenn Adamson. We are so excited to be doing this show. We first met Glenn when he wrote an incredible review for us for a Marianne Unger show we had. He wrote it for Art Forum. And after that review, he said to us, look, I've got another sculptor. You guys have got to come and see her work. And, honestly, Christine and I get, 5, 6, 10, 15 artist submissions a week. But, Glenn being Glenn, we said, all right, look, we'll go up and see. And I have to say, from the moment we stepped into Sally's studio, it was instant. I think Christine and I locked eyes and we said, all right, we're doing this show. And it has been a real treat to get to know you, get to know Glenn better. And we're so excited for this relationship and to be showing this work and also to hear y'all's conversation. So thank you guys for joining us and we hope you enjoy.
Hi everyone, thank you so much to Christine and Martha and to everyone here at Barry Campbell for hosting this great conversation. Hello Sally. Thank you all so much for coming. I wanted to say a couple of quick things in preamble. First, this is being recorded, so it's probably unlikely most of you will be on recording because it's right there. Hello at home. But if you do ask a question, it's going to be on the website afterward, just so you're aware of that. And also, there's even more that we'll be able to fit into our 45 minutes of conversation in this book. So do get yourself a copy before you go. I wrote an essay for it, but more to the point, there's absolutely amazing photography of the pieces. And there are many more pieces, as we'll describe, than we were able to fit in this one exhibition, of course. So this will give you the full compendium of what Sally Silberberg was doing between about 1987 and 1989, and that's a story we're going to get into momentarily. If you don't mind, I'll start with a little bit of personal preamble. So I've actually known the Silberberg family since 1994 because I worked in their craft shop. So it was called the Clay Pot, a beloved institution. The emporium that I worked in was on 7th Avenue in Brooklyn, and of course had subsequent locations since, including now in Hudson, run by their daughter Tara, who I guess I would have to describe as my boss. And Sally,
Co-worker.
Yeah, co-worker, pal, and of course Bob and Sally were the founders of the store long before I was there. So I've known the family for 30 years, 30 plus years. Little did I know, however, and in fact hardly anyone knew, that Sally had just a few years before I was there been making these extraordinary sculptures in a very concentrated burst of creativity, problem solving, formal invention. And as I say, I had absolutely no idea. The exhibition that you're seeing here is really the first public presentation of this work with a couple of very minor exceptions. These have only been in Sally's studio in Western Massachusetts, and we'll explain a little bit more about why that is when we get into the conversation. So when Tara and also an important person called Leslie Farron, who's a very prominent ceramics gallerist and historian in her own right, reached out to me a few months ago and said, we'd really love you to come and see what Sally was making at this time. I, of course, wanted to see the family again. It's been a long time. And so I had exactly the same experience that Martha just described of going up there, having a nice chat, then walking across the field into the studio, walking into this room and feeling like I was in an aesthetic transport comparable with Tutankhamun's tomb. And I think a lot of you will have the context for this work to at least have some intuition as to how not only technically but also formally intelligent it is. But I have to say I've been working on ceramics really my whole career, so again 30 years or so, and this is among the most proficient and extraordinary and inventive ceramic sculpture that's ever been made in any place or time. And in terms of post-war American sculpture, I would put it at the level of Ken Price, Peter Voulkos, Betty Woodman, Toshiko Takeizu, those kinds of names. And the fact that nobody knew anything about it was quite remarkable to say the least. So it's fantastic that we've been able to work with the great team, as I say, here at Barry Campbell and make this work known. So that's what I'm going to say at the beginning.
Okay.
A lot of spoiler alerts in there, but let's go back now. So Sally, before we get to the sculptures themselves, can you tell us a little bit about your trajectory, how you were trained at Alfred, and then what you were doing before you started making these?
I am an Alfred graduate, and some of you may know Alfred is one of the New York College of Ceramics, and I have a BFA in ceramics from Alfred. And it's a very intense technological kind of education, and it's a real college education. And I have to say that after 2 years at Alfred, it's in the middle of nowhere, I said, I need another kind of experience when I'm in college. And so I wound up taking a year of independent study in Stockholm, Sweden, at a very small little art school called the Nyckelvik School. And I kind of wound up getting the connection through my husband, who had befriended this group of young people in Stockholm. And one of these women, her grandfather, had started the school. So she gave me an introduction to the school, and I walked in, and the head of the school, Fred Frosson, the only studio potter in Sweden, took one look at me and he said, just do whatever you want. and what I did that year was ceramics, and every afternoon for about 5 hours, it was a model, and I did life drawing. And that was how I learned to be an artist, because I was completely self-motivated, and there was no like, now this week we're going to do a color study on this. This came from me. So when I graduated from Alfred, it was such an easy thing to. We got married, we had children, and within 1 year of graduation from Alfred, I started a studio.
And what year did you graduate?
And so I graduated in 1967. Tara was born in 1968, and we started the clay pot in 1969. And it was a storefront, and at that point, I know this breaks all the young people's heart. It was like $120 a month rent, so there was no economic risk, and I just started making pots. And I was making a lot of pots, and so my first wholesale account was the Pottery Barn, which was one little store on the west side,
which is the Pottery Barn.
The Pottery Barn, right, before they became, and the buyer, I loved his name, I never forgot his name. Tony Brush was the buyer for that. So, and then within 3 or 4 years after, I think we were in Brooklyn about 7 years, and in '74, Bob was working at the Whitney, and he was getting bored, and I just wanted a big studio, and I wanted a gas kill like I've had at Alfred. And
can I just interject, since you mentioned Bob? Fun fact, which we'll have to ask him about later. Bob also gave me Bethesda one of her first shows. Just saying. It's another story, but please carry on.
Yeah. So we packed up the kids and bought a little farm up in Western Mass, and the farm had, a lot of New England farms have big old barn houses that are falling down. This one was perfect. It was just about maybe 20 by 40, a small barn built in the 1920s, and the perfect size for a studio. So we started, and it was a wholesale pottery. We kept the store in New York, and was there after that. And then I did a large wholesale business. And the pots, you know, practice makes perfect. The more pots I threw, the thinner they got, the bigger they got, and the more bored I got. And so
Although it's also important to say they were porcelain.
Well, in the beginning they weren't. In the beginning they were stoneware.
Right, originally. But
And then as they got thinner and thinner, I thought, oh, these could be porcelain. So I transferred, kind of did both at the same time, and then owned the business for a while. And the porcelain clay I had was kind of a mysterious clay that had more silica and melting ingredients in it than clay. clay.
So making it more glassy.
More glass-like than clay. And so, and it had a different feeling than the other porcelains that I used. And I became interested in the fact that when I was trimming things with this clay, it would get very smooth. It would like just sort of seal itself in like a clay that has any roughness to it. And I just started thinking about carving it.
Right. So carving is one crucial thing, but then the other thing, which maybe we should talk about first, is the layering.
Right.
And
Well,
construction.
the layering is integral to the fact that these pieces exist, because porcelain is very dense, and unlike even stoneware that has grog in it, where it has some release of the air when it's fired, porcelain has no release. It's just solid. And we live in this beautiful glacial valley, and there's a rock formation there called schists, and a lot of them are actually vertical schists, and because the earth kept being moved in different ways. And you could just take a hammer and a chisel, you could just sheave off these pieces of stone. And I just wondered if that might be the solution to having porcelain not explode. So the cracks are really there for a reason. They are the release valve for the air that's caught in there. And when these pieces are the end result of 4 or 5 years. That's pieces that started about the size of this bottle. And the first piece I fired, I was petrified, because at that point the kiln was filled with things I was planning to sell, that it would explode. So I took an unfired pot and put it on top of it in case it exploded. At least it would contain all the shards that were going to fall out. But it was so tiny, but it didn't explode. And the very early pieces, I was boring a hole in the middle of them, so there wasn't a lot of mass. It still gave me some surface to play around with carving, and I began to understand the breakaway points of these lines I was creating.
Sally, can I just interrupt to say also the fact that you were boring a hole through almost like a core sample?
Yeah.
That also, to me, suggests that you were making a transition from a functional vessel form to a porcelain here, correct?
Totally not functional, yeah. And those started getting bigger, and at some point, I'm going to think, well, then it doesn't need this hole in there anymore. These could just be sculptures. And so there are, I think I did about 2 dozen of them. We kept changing, began to understand different things. I was originally the first art, and there's none of those here. The first ones are more square because I'm still thinking the hole in the middle when I'm creating this block of clay. And then I began to realize, oh, these can be any shape. The clay is still soft at that point, and I'm pounding it using like very thin boards of plywood and a big rubber mallet, and I would just keep pounding it, and I could change the shape of it a little bit. So it was a very, very slow process of discovery of what I had gotten myself into, and it was very exciting.
And there was also another complexity in the layering and the construction, right? Because you're layering, but then you're
Yes, now you can see like on all of them, there's different directions, and I began to realize that, they don't all have to just be slit. They could have, colored clay in between them too. There were so many possibilities. Just like opening a door that you could just like, oh, what about that? I always tell young students that for me, art is all about doing and looking, doing and looking. When you see something that you've done, and maybe it's just kind of a little unusual, maybe it's a mistake, just look at it a little bit harder, because there's information in that you wouldn't have thought of, and it just happens. And so it was extremely exciting.
So, Sally, can I ask you what it meant to you at the time to be making a sculpture in this very free-form, experimental way? Obviously, we have to think that this is the late 80s, so there's a lot of angst, to put it mildly, around the question of what ceramics can do, how they're categorized. you had been a very successful functional potter,
Yeah.
and so you were very firmly encamped on one side of that line, and suddenly you're reaching into a world that includes
Yeah.
Brancusi
It
and
was
yeah.
kind of scary, you
Yeah.
know. I mean, I think in some ways, and I think one of the reasons why I didn't push to show them, they were a little intimidated. And it was like, oh, where did these come from?
Like you weren't sure what you had made.
Yeah, I really wasn't sure. I mean, there was never in any of these pieces any sketches ahead of time. I never said, oh, I'm going to do a piece that's like this. What I did know was I was going to make a block that now is more sort of on an angle that was taller than it was wide, like that piece there. All of a sudden, that got stretched. You know, I mean, when the clay was wet, the possibilities of the shapes were endless. And then after it dried, and it would take a while. It would be a big gap of time because it had to be leather hard before I could carve it. So there was always like these gaps, and you just kept looking at it going, where's that going?
How much were you carving away of the mass, the constructed mass? Do you think?
I tried to keep the parameters, you know, so that there was still, but there is one piece called Shard that I literally carved away the whole thing, except that all that's left is a little bit at the bottom. I tried to, you know, after I'd done all this work, I hated to throw it all away. But there was no preconception when I was starting to carve. I was mostly just digging into these structures and then pulling away, seeing these wonderful ripple marks, which were then exposing these planes.
So these kinds of textures here, that's actually having more of a
Yeah,
tearing.
that was from the tearing, because the clay was soft. I mean, it wasn't soft, but it was still you could still move it.
Mm.
And so then I would be very careful, try to leave that alone.
So can I, this is not going to be not a question, but
Yeah.
more of an observation. One thing that might not immediately occur to you is that these works are in relation to the grid, right? Because you have a structure, a matrix essentially,
Right.
that you're then interacting with. And so one thing that immediately struck me, having thought quite a bit about 1980s work recently, is that there are lots of things happening in abstraction at the time. Neo Geo, if that rings a bell, like Peter Halley, artists like that. But also that there's of course a much longer trajectory of abstraction in which the grid is really the dominant paradigm. So think of Agnes Martin, for example, think of Mondrian. And although it doesn't, because you're so captivated by the material experimentation, that might not immediately occur to you. But in fact, what you're doing is creating this kind of three-dimensional grid structure that you can then interact with and interrupt. So when I wrote in the essay about these works being both constructed and deconstructed, that's not just a technical observation, it also relates to the history of 20th century sculpture in an important way. And I guess I'm wondering what you actually were looking at the time, like museum-wise and so on.
You know, I mean, we're up in Western Mass. You know, I'm coming to New York, obviously, and going to museums. But I, to be quite honest with you, I was so into my own crazy little head.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't. I mean, the one over there, the black and white one, that's called Cube Study or Grid Study. You know, that actually led to the paintings in a way.
Yeah.
And then the paintings did get into grids by the back door, which is how everything happens in my art. Is always like, oh, what did I just do? And, but there is one called Cube Study, which I actually tried to, and it's pretty successful, of doing a gradient of the colored clay, from white to the darker gray, and have it move all the way through the piece and come out the other side. And that, I think, is more what you're talking about.
I think that's the most explicit.
Yeah, that I was starting to see more formal ideas in this, whereas the earlier ones were more a reaction to the clay.
Right. So the other very predominant image here is, of course, geology, as you said, the schists. And one thing that both of those ideas have in common, so an abstract sculpture that has
in a way, a kind of internal neural relationship to his language, like the cues going through where you can't even see them.
Right, the mystery in
Exactly.
the inside,
Exactly.
that
Which
was
is
exciting.
something people often talk about ceramics when you think about vessels, like Toshiko Take's work or enclosed forms, for example. She would talk about the dark area you can't see as being the subject of the work.
Yeah,
So you're also getting us this enclosed mass with all this unseen structure,
right,
but that also has a geological
yeah,
equivalent, because as you said, there's all this movement in the earth. We think of the earth as
Yeah.
rock formations being quite still, but in the grand scheme of things, obviously they're very turbulent, and that's how they come to be the way they are. So the way that you're forming this mineral substance, clay, also has a kind of relationship to that.
absolutely.
Geological
Yeah,
motion.
yeah. I always jokingly call them the carpool series, because I'm driving through New England and seeing all these road cuts of all this geology,
Okay.
you know.
Yeah.
Boy, it's like in such different stones. I mean, you know, it's just like this huge hodgepodge,
Yeah.
you know, rising up out of the
We didn't
earth.
think of calling the show the carpool series, but I think shifting ground was maybe a bit more. But with you driven up there, you
Yeah,
passed these
yeah, you know,
amazing
you pass
slopes,
these
cliffs.
amazing cliffs and, you know, it's just, as an artist, you're just responding to what you're seeing, you know, the visuals of it. I've lived for 50 years in this incredible environment of rocks and,
Mm.
you know, the woods, and I'm always interested in overlapping, things that are happening, seeing things through. So it's,
Sally, can you talk a little bit more about the palette?
well, the palette started out just sort of boring, gray and white. It was, you know, it took a while to even begin to understand all these. I mean, because ceramics is the chameleon material. You can, if you can think of it, you can do it. I mean, you know, with all the different materials and glazes and whatever. And but just the raw materials, it's not like color. It's merely oxide. So when you see the green in this piece, that's chrome oxide. That makes the green. And cobalt blue, and you know, so they're pure oxides, and they have their own firing particularities. And there's a piece in the other room that's has a lot of iron in it, and iron melts at a lower temperature than the porcelain.
Mud season.
No, well, that one doesn't have the concentration of the iron. It's actually called ferrous, which is,
Ferrous, yes.
yeah. And so you'll see the stripes, the lines running through it that are the pure, very pure iron, porcelain that's been colored with iron. They're metallic because it's really starting to melt at that point.
Mm.
You know, it's like,
And maybe oxidized as well.
and I was firing the kiln. It's a gas kiln. It was a big beast. I had a lot of problems with it, with the copper reds, but it was perfect for these. And I would fire it in a reduction atmosphere, so you would get some of that sense of flame and flash on it, but not so much because it's not glazed. It was just a pure
None of
clay.
them are glazed.
None of them are glazed. They're sanded. I would sand after I established the forms, and the pieces would get to be in powder world bone dries, which means there's no water in it anymore.
It's before firing.
Before firing, then I would sand it very, very, very lightly, sand it with emery cloth, just to get that smoothness.
And they're fired just once.
Well, they're fired twice, because
Oh,
they're
really?
fired, first they were bisque fired.
Oh.
And the bisque firing is a controlled firing. So you're able to put, and I would just fire one piece at a time, and I realized, and they were very heavy, they're still heavy, but when they were wet, they were like 50, 60 pounds of clay. I didn't have any helpers. So I realized I could build up the shelf on the bisque kiln, so I didn't have to go all the way down. And just put it on the top, leave the top cracked for like a day, close, don't turn on any more heat, close the top, leave it like that for a day, and just very, very slowly tweak it up so that they wouldn't
get shocked.
They wouldn't get shocked and explode at that point. But then that's when they could explode.
Yeah. So why the separate firing and final firing?
Well, the bisque firing was just to get it ready to go into the gas fire.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So, because that you can't control. That you turn those burners on and it's going. It's you can control it, obviously, a little bit, but not the way you can control an electric kiln.
Got it. Okay. So let's now move the story on to the question why they weren't seen. So you said a little bit about that, and of course a couple of them were, we should say.
Yes, no, there was in Syracuse, the Adamson Museum, which has a long history of being a ceramic having a ceramics collection, has had a national, not yearly, maybe in the beginning it was yearly, but in 1987 they redid it.
They revived it.
They hadn't done it for a long time, and so I hadn't done these yet. I had just done the vessels, the ones with the holes, and I thought, well, this is a good time to see what other people are thinking about this. So I sent in 2 pieces, and they accepted both of them, which was exciting. And then the Everson was invited by Korea during the Olympics in 1988 to be part of an international ceramic show. And so the Everson sent one of my pieces with them. I think it was the only one that hadn't been invited. It was 2-tiered, invited the big guys and the older jurymen. So they sent that out. And then I sent one piece of Ferris I sent to Japan, and that was in the show there. Once again, a juried show. Right after I did the work in the Everson show, the Brooklyn Museum bought a piece, and they bought a vessel. They didn't buy a sculpture. And then a couple of years ago, the Smithsonian bought a piece. So they, recently, I don't know that they ever showed it. I don't think the curators liked it very much. I should send them a copy.
Yeah. They might need to get the rest of the story.
Right, they might need to know more about it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of its exhibition history.
So why didn't you seek out an exhibition like this one then?
I'm a woman. I'm living in the middle of nowhere. I had no idea how I would ship these things. I was clueless. I hadn't been involved in them long enough to understand what I had even done. And then we moved back to New York, and I just thought, and we moved back. The idea was we're only there for 1 year, and then we would sell our little clay pot. Too bad you would have missed out. And move back to and so I never felt like I had that I had done this. I mean, it wasn't finished, it was just a break. And then we got to New York, and New York was wonderful, it's magical. And within 2 years of moving to New York, I got a great studio with Catherine on Douglas Street, and I started painting. And the painting was so exciting. I started the painting sort of where this piece left off. I was creating a very, 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 very slow gradation of gray to light, dark to light. And then I would just put the middle color as the wash over it. So on some sides it was dark, and some sides it was light. And that got me going. And then I wanted to do it in color. And of course, color is really hard. It's hard to do that in color. So that was another 3 or 4 years of figuring out that problem. And then out of that problem came the grid paintings. And so it went on for about 15 years. It's very exciting.
And you're still working with color works on paper?
Yeah, and now I'm working on using paper. I was curious of things that are insides and outsides, and so I'm doing drawings that are mirror drawings. So I draw the original drawing, and then I trace carefully just the shapes, and then I get it on using chalk that I just run it on, and then filling in, and so it's like can be inside out, upside down, and then it's like this wonderful world of found things. You don't know what's going to happen. It's sort of like opening up a gift.
Because of the interference.
The interference between the 2 patterns, and so it's been a very interesting series.
You'll see a little bit more about these painting the works on paper like to see these works here in the gallery for this time?
Very.
Yeah. I think for all of us, but especially for you, I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
But how do you feel like they look?
Oh, they look beautiful.
Yeah, it's an amazing presentation.
They did such a great job lighting them. You know,
Absolutely.
we should mention that in the pictures in the
The
catalog
bases,
are the bases. Because at one point, that all the shadows that you see, the way that Christine and Martha lit them, I thought that how wonderful that to give the sculpture the sense of place, that I would create bases like these shadows. So I did these shadow bases, and it took years to do them, and then Glenn comes in and goes, I don't know about the bases.
Well, to be fair, I think if you had one of these in your living room, which hopefully some people may be lucky enough to get that experience, I think the bases are actually a
Yeah.
great move.
Yeah.
But obviously you can see that having these in their original format and on these beautiful white plinths is a great solution.
No, I think the
Yeah.
bases would have been too
We
confusing.
should say also the bases were partly inspired by the wooden bases of
Yeah,
Scottish
yeah,
rocks.
no, I was in a museum at the LA museum, and they had a special show of scholar rocks, and there was one rock that was just unbelievable, and they had just made a base that just did the perimeter of this rock.
Hugged it,
Yeah, and I thought, that's a good idea, because I'd been thinking about bases, and then like a square base, none of it seemed to work, but that was sort of a light bulb. Oh, I can make shaped bases. Easier said than done. Plus, they're so heavy that the first time I made the first ones, these actually dented the bases. I didn't use the right wood, so it took a long time to figure it out. But the bases are very nice, and I think that you would, if you had them in your house, just to give them a sense of space amongst everything else. The bases are good. They're confusing, I think. Okay.
Well, they certainly look fantastic here. I think they'll all agree. It does feel like a miracle to have them suddenly, because they are so much like meteorites as well. It really feels like they've been in this kind of distant orbit, and suddenly, man, they've landed here in Chelsea, the kind of center of the world, and they just are so convincing, so powerful. It's really an incredible experience. Okay, let's take some questions.
Okay.
Any questions for Sally? A big chance. Yes.
Has the porcelain been used in this way before?
Well,
I'm asking, I'm a docent at the Museum of Arts and Design.
Great.
And
Thank
and
you.
they have a show there right now with a French artist whose work is in porcelain, and we heard about the delicacy of it, the translucent whiteness, and this is so different. So I wondered if any other artists were working in this way with
I mean, I
porcelain.
think that in Asia now, that there's some ceramicists that are starting to play with this idea that the porcelain doesn't have to be delicate. And they seem to be more interested in kind of fusing it with other materials, glass,
Yeah.
you know, and I don't think that anybody has done what I've done in terms of creating these solid objects that, you know.
I think that's right. Not this laminated structure.
Yeah. I mean, there's colored clay.
Yeah.
Porcelain has been used as colored clay, and it's always made very thin, you know, like a vessel.
Yeah.
Like slab, they would do slabs of all the different colors, and then take that slab and form it into some sort of a vessel shape.
There was also a European and British tradition of making what's called agate ware. I think it is in stone, and that's a bit different. But they would Staffordshire, for example, you would have a lot of production sort of around the Wedgwood moment, and what they would do is to laminate it like this, and then they would sometimes marbleize it, but then they would use it to throw pottery or not slip cat, sorry, but to press mold it. So you would get a much thinner object that would have that same layered, and then as I say, sometimes marbleized quality. So the idea of tinting the clay and then making it into a structure and making an object out of it, that does have some historical precedent, but the effect is completely different from this.
Thank you.
But if you want to Google it, it's called agate ware. Yeah.
Do you use the same process as like Narracone where people
Yeah,
they
yeah.
and then slice it?
Yeah.
But this is solid,
Solid.
like
These are soft.
pre-slice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
pre-sliced, just like at the deli. Yes.
How long would you work on a piece and manipulate it before you felt like you were going a little too far with the porcelain?
Sometimes too far.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that each one of these pieces is probably a month's worth of work between all the different steps of it. I mean, it was a very long process. You know.
Always maintaining it under wrap and
Constantly wrapping it, getting it to leather hard so that I could carve it. What I needed was the clay to be as hard on the inside as it was on the outside.
right.
And that's how the tear marks would happen. If it was still too soft, it would just become mush, you know. So there were a lot of waiting. There was a lot of waiting time.
And did you actually lose any of them?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of them came out in pieces. And if I had done it longer, I would have gotten smarter and realized that I could have saved some of the pieces that I was carving away and kept them as props. And that just occurred to me after too late. But you know, and they weren't all fired as you see them, and that's been part of the problem. The work has a lot to do with balance. Because the clay is so dense and heavy that I could do things where the pieces look like they should fall over, except that the center of the gravity of the piece allows it to stay up.
Yeah.
You know, so
they're cantilevered.
they're cantilevered, and that was the gravity of the denseness. Because if you had this idea just with regular clay like slab built, they'd fall over. You know, they're able to wait. So it was like a dance. I had a dance going with them as I would carve them and keep turning them. Okay. But then when they got fired, everything shifted a little bit. You know, they didn't stay exactly, because the cracks created a different kind of energy and a different balance. So you'll see that some of them have little props so that they could get back up on their feet again.
You spent a lot of time trying to get them ready for this experience.
Yes.
Question.
Okay.
You started making the most remarkable, usable ceramic ware. Beautifully designed, beautifully usable, that had rules. You had to have the handle, you had to have a spout, you had to make the cup work. So you're doing these incredible things, and there are a lot of rules. Now, here, no rules.
Exactly.
No rules at all. And so I'm wondering how you move both towards and then back to more usable work.
Well, I never really went back to usable work. After you did these, you couldn't make mugs again.
That's
This just opened doors in my mind, you know, just like,
that's what I thought.
and we were at a point in our lives that I didn't need to make mugs anymore. I mean, I really was supporting our family, you know, for 10 years, throwing mugs, incredible quantities of ceramics, and that were very popular, and I could sell as much as I made, but and I used to love throwing pots. I mean, this was the problem. But wholesale killed that joy.
Hard on your body too.
Very hard on your body. And this wasn't that easy on my body either, to be quite honest with you. But I just realized I had more to say. You know, there were ideas, and the sculptures led to the paintings. I mean, they really did. When I started painting, I immediately had an idea. There was no floundering. I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So,
Well, it's a remarkable transition to have such excellence in both areas.
yeah, no, that was pretty amazing. But there are rules to this. There were a lot of rules, you know. And I had, once I figured out how to pull it off, then I had
But they were your rules.
my rules. Yeah, how to make up your own rules is always the best thing ever.
Go into undefined space
Yes.
around it.
And that's where all the that's where all the ideas start coming.
Yeah.
You are undefined, there's lots of entrances and exits and all of this.
Yeah. Maybe we can take one or two more questions, is that right? Yes.
I like that you mentioned the Scholars Rock, because to me, when I entered and when I saw the work, it almost, I mean, it reminded me of that, very, very long tradition, but almost creating it for yourself. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. No, I mean, I've always been into rocks, and so, and of course, as you know, when you're young, you don't know about other cultures and scholar rocks. And when I discovered that there actually was a tradition of scholar rocks, I mean, that rocks were like really.
Did you know about them before making these, or is that?
No,
something you
I
discovered?
knew about them, yeah. And I actually shared with Glenn, we've been going through papers in our house because we're unfortunately moving. And I found a paper I wrote in 7th grade, and it was beautiful, large, cursive handwriting. And the name of it is called Time, Water, and Rocks.
That would be a good title too.
Especially if we have the,
Right, and it just was like, oh, really? Something you do as a child and you have connection to.
Well, what's also interesting about those scholars' rocks that I think a lot of people don't realize is that some of them are altered. So
I didn't know that.
the myth of them is that they're all just as found, but sometimes they're improved through sculpting. And there's this very interesting, it's almost like a Gerhard Richter, which also is, I feel like there's a strong affinity there to his work. Is that right? Okay, yeah. But, how with a Richter squeegee painting, you don't really know what's an intentional mark and what's a random mark, and the fact of its indiscriminate relationship to chance and intention is part of the subject. That's actually true of scholars' rocks too. You don't know whether you're looking at something that's human-made or something natural. And this, of course, is extremely human-made on every level, but it also has so much to do with the capabilities of the material, and you're sort of drawing that out because it is so geological, it feels like you're letting the clay speak. So I think there's also a deeper connection to that Chinese tradition. Yeah. Maybe one last question, yes.
I'm curious about their relationship to gravity and plumb line. The orientation, like did these, as you worked, were you shifting the orientation? And they don't have they must be so heavy, and they don't have a sag to them. They're so upright.
I think that they would usually find their footing pretty quickly as I was working on them. But I have to tell you, it was 40 years ago, so I'm like, I have my studio notebooks, I have a few drawings. Most of the notebooks have more to do with just the color sequences and the structure, not so much the carving. The carving was very intuitive. It was just like fun. It was just that the pieces were kind of telling me what to do in a way. As things got exposed, and I think in the beginning they were so geometric, but then I began to understand, they don't need to be just straight lines, they can be curves, I mean, it's like, I really hadn't finished the series, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah. Although now that we are 40 years later, I think the fact of them still being so full of potential and this explosive sense of possibility, that's a lot of the reason that they do feel so exciting. And maybe I'll just close with the observation that I think historians, especially art historians maybe, are very good at thinking that we know what happened and that we have the story and the shape, and then suddenly something,
Throw a curveball.
Absolutely. And this kind of, it's almost like a kind of miraculous apparition from a ceramics history point of view. So it really is tremendously exciting, not just because of the quality of the objects in your individual story, but it also just makes me wonder what else is out there. And there's just so much more to be discovered, both in your work and in the sort of world that it conjures around it.
I know, it'll be interesting to see. I feel like in some ways I've opened a Pandora's box, and to see how the next generation takes some of these ideas and starts to personalize it and do their It's just that the structure creates the entryway into this new world.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. Okay, Sally, thank you so much.
Thank you.